This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 221 of the Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got LaKiesha Tomlin, and she is the founder of Thriving Ambition, which is a career management consulting group. They help engineers and technical people, just like you and me, position ourselves to get multiple offers. They help us with figuring out what we're going to do, what we need to do, and how to get out there. They also help companies retain and attract diverse talent, which we've talked about that a lot on the show, and how important diversity is when it comes to technical talent or any talent in reality. She's been mentioned in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Self Magazine, and lots more. With all that being said, LaKiesha, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today, kind of what your career journey has been like, and why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, most definitely. It's been a very long journey. So I started off my career like most people as an engineer. So I went to school to get a degree in mechanical engineering and then did 5 summer internships with a major aerospace company. And then after that, they hired me to be a flight test engineer, and I was in flight tests for a number of years, had a bunch of different jobs as an individual contributor. And then about 6.5 years into my professional career, I got promoted to be a mid-level engineering manager. And that leap just opened my eyes to so many things that were different from being an individual contributor. Just very challenging, not in terms of the technical work, but working with people, and especially in that particular job, because I had up to 22 direct reports, and I also had another manager working for me as well. So in that transition from individual contributor to manager, I learned a lot about the hiring process, what managers are really looking for. And after about 18 months going through that transition, trying to make that leap, that's when I decided that I can help so many more people by packaging my information and into a course, and also sharing it through those various platforms that you mentioned, Forbes, my blog, YouTube, and other places. So this for me is a passion, and I just decided to pursue it full time earlier this year. So I'm really excited as to what the future will bring with this and helping so many people.
So let me ask you this: how scary was that to cut the cord, if you will?
It was very scary. I mean, of course, with anything in life, you plan, and especially with, taking this entrepreneurial leap, you have some money set aside. You want to, do all your calculations and figure in things. So I would say, fortunately, I'd taken a sabbatical from the professional working world back in 2018, and I did have some money, and then quickly I learned that I should have saved twice as much as I thought I would need. Like, it was like money was just flowing out of my checking account like water. So this time around, I had a better understanding of what was required. So I did double that amount, and then once I hit that number and made sure I had a somewhat solid business plan, because of course things change. I decided to take the leap, and I thought about, well, what's the worst that could happen? The worst is, okay, it doesn't work out the way that I wanted to, but with my professional experience and knowing how to, get a job, which is the thing that I teach, it won't be that bad. And the best thing that could happen is I could work with, thousands more people. I could, help, a number of people excel in their careers. So just basically just taking that kind of a, two-pronged approach, the planning, the saving, but then also, um, you know, doing the work mentally, because because like I said, it's very challenging to take this leap mentally in order to make the leap and stick with this decision. So far, I'm happy with the decision because I get to work with people who are, kind of earlier in their career, kind of more senior in their career. And of course, the challenges are slightly different, but it's very encouraging to me that I'm on the right path when people are getting jobs and getting interviews at top companies. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, and I think now is really probably a really exciting time for you to be where you're at. And I don't know if you predicted this or could have predicted this, but I had a guess on it. Honestly, I talked about it with a couple of people already about, 2021 is kind of like, seems to be the beginning of what some people are calling the Great Resignation, or the tidal wave of turnover, depending on if you're an HR side or the other side. But we're seeing, kind of unprecedented people like leaving their careers and their jobs and moving on to somewhere else, maybe because of remote work, maybe because of realigned priorities in life that they've, come to realize with COVID and the things that have happened in 2020, and starting to kind of readjust where they're going. What have you seen when it comes to the career outlay for technology leaders and folks in general?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, yeah, I have seen those articles on the Great Resignation, but then it's funny because you see those articles that kind of contrast that. It's like, oh, people aren't resigning, they're staying. So it's always funny to see these headlines in the news. But in terms of what I've been seeing, yeah, there's definitely a lot of hiring that's happening now. And I believe that it's going to continue for the rest of 2021. It'll probably, slow down a little bit around the holiday season, which, typically happens every year, but it doesn't mean that companies won't be hiring. So essentially what I'm seeing is not only are a lot of companies hiring, but the competition is a lot more than it was, say, maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the Great Resignation, as you mentioned. But then, too, the pandemic has given people an opportunity to really take a retrospective or introspective look at their lives and really evaluate, is this where they want to be? How do I get to where I truly want to be? So there's just a lot of time for people to just really, slow down and really think about their life. And that may involve, leaving their current position, the current company, maybe even the country, because I have seen people really embrace that remote work style and think about it in this way. Well, if I do all my work online, I could live in Italy or wherever I really
Yeah.
want to live and still have this income coming in and this lifestyle and really live the lifestyle that I want. So I think we're just in a fascinating time in terms of hiring, especially technical hiring, just because with all of the SaaS companies and all of the internet-based companies that we have, and this trend obviously will continue to grow, companies are always looking for technical talent, and it's not just people with software development or IT backgrounds. It's people of all technical disciplines, and who are looking for, or companies that are looking for this technical talent. And I think it's a very exciting time. And just because there's a lot of companies hiring this technical talent doesn't mean that you can slack off as a technical professional and just think that you're going to get picked up just because you have a degree or experience in a technical area, because everybody else is looking for the same things that you are, and you have to work at it. Just like before, can't just expect for it to happen because you have XYZ background.
Yeah, I know when I first heard about, people talking about Great Resignation and all this stuff, it was like, oh, there's gonna be so many opportunities for everybody. I said, yeah, but there's also gonna be so much competition now. It's gonna be like, you got to look at it both ways. Whenever there is mass opportunity, there's also massive competition, and we all have to up our game a little bit. We've got to do something that differentiates us from everybody else. And maybe that's a better resume. Maybe that's interviewing better. What have you seen are some of the things that can help differentiate let's say, just to pick an avatar here, maybe a team lead or a first-time manager when they're going for that next role? What can they do to differentiate themselves from everybody else out there?
Ooh, that is an awesome question and something that I love talking about. And I think the thing that is, I know the thing that is going to help people differentiate themselves from everybody else is positioning. So a lot of times I see, especially people in technical or that have technical backgrounds, they only focus on the technology or their technical skills. And yeah, that's very important because no matter how well you interview, how good your resume looks, if you don't have that technical skill set that hiring manager or group or whoever is looking for, then you're not going to get picked for the job. Like that's just it. But if you do have that skill set, another thing that you can do in order to set yourself apart is position yourself as the problem solver. Like companies hire or hiring managers hire people to solve problems. It's not, the person with the best resume or the best interviewing style. So even if you don't fit all of the requirements perfectly on paper, if you position yourself to be that problem solver, maybe not the exact problems, because unless you're working on the team inside of the company, you won't know exactly what the issues are. But if you can show how you solve similar problems or just other problems in general throughout your resume, cover letter, if you have one, the way that you interview, all of those things, if you can position yourself in that way, that is going to help you stand out so much more than just talking about what you did in terms of and I'm sure, John, you've seen this on resumes where a bullet line will say something like responsible for XYZ. Yeah. And then they'll move on. And it's like, okay, who cares? Like, what was the significance of XYZ? If you can take it a step further in your resume and the way that you interview, you'll stand out much more than everybody else interviewing for that job or applying to that job.
Yeah, one of the things I love to see on a resume or even a cover letter, if you're just telling like a short story of a success, or like you talked about a problem that you solved, is to put some metrics behind it. How can you prove that you solved this problem? Like what is the increase in what is the return on investment? What is the number of customers that you impacted, or whatever you've done to improve? Put that in numbers some way that I can quantify it. Because just saying that you improve customer service, well, that means nothing to me. Absolutely nothing. But if you say improve customer survey ratings from 3 stars to 4.5 stars in 2 years. Okay, well that's an improvement. That matters a little bit more.
Yeah, so, most definitely.
So what are some ways that we can show that we are solving those problems? Let's say let me back it up even a step further. Should I have a cover letter these days, or is that kind of just old fashioned?
Man. So this is kind of a sticky subject. So in my experience, and just talking about my own career journey, I've had a cover letter and I've submitted it, but I don't know that it actually got read. So in terms of having a cover letter, I know that if you're applying to jobs to say the federal government or even state government, they're a little bit more traditional in their approach, and they may require that you have a cover letter. And, if so, then fine, whip one up and submit it. But generally, if you're applying to a major corporation, like a multi-billion-dollar corporation, typically they'll have a spot for it, but it's not necessarily required. Yeah. And I know when I was interviewing and looking for technical talent, very few people would submit a cover letter, and those who did, I would skip over it. To be honest, I'm just looking for the resume because I just want to get to the point. I don't want to read anything additional, because I mean, John, you know how it is. You get very busy, you have all these other competing priorities, and you're trying to hire people at the same time. So you're trying to maximize your time as much as possible. And it does not include reading, at least for me, it didn't include reading any extra materials. Like some people would attach transcripts and copies of awards and stuff like that. And all that is amazing. But I don't have time to look through it. And I mean, unless, I just have some downtime after work, which was rare, but.
So you're saying technical managers are busy? What?
Yeah, it's such a foreign concept.
Yeah. So it takes me to my next question. So let's say you haven't updated your resume in a long time, which I recommend to everybody keep it up to date. Every time I have like a big success or a project that goes well, I'm going to look at my resume and see what I can take off and what I can put on that's more current and relevant. And, hopefully I'm improving every year so I can put something new on that's great and remove something that's less important. But how long should our resumes be so that we're not boring and so that the actual reader has time to look through it and they're not just like, oh my gosh, this is too long, delete and moving on?
That is an excellent question. And it comes up so much, which is why I'm so happy that you asked this. So typically, these are just guidelines. These are not rules, but I say no matter what your experience is, I would say 2 pages max. And I know for those who may have 20 plus years of experience, it may be hard to fit all of that into 2 pages. So I would say only at that point would you consider maybe 3, but 2 is typically good. And especially if your early career, say, less than 5 years of experience, there's no reason for you to have a 4 or 5 page resume. So I've seen it. Yeah, it's like I've seen it on both ends. I remember being an undergrad and we we were getting ready for graduation. I think this was about a month or so, or maybe a couple of months before graduation. And we had an exercise in one of our classes where we would peer review a classmate's resume. And I remember one of my really good friends, study buddy, like he was just amazing guy. He had maybe 3 or 4 internships at that point, and he had a 5-page resume. I didn't even read it. I said, look, you need to chop this down. I'm not spending my time reading this resume. So I gave him some pointers and he came back with 2 pages. I was like, okay, this is awesome.
Yes. One tip that I have for people, one tip that I have for people like me that may have, 20 plus years of experience and you want to list everything because you don't want to leave anything out is, I'm looking for a management level job, right? Or director level or VP or CIO, some type of job like that. So I would put those experiences that relate to that up high and, be detailed. But like I have a section called legacy experience where I just list in one line, my PC tech, my systems administrator, my database administrator jobs, and they're one line. You don't write anything about them because it's not necessary. Just put like, we say, well, that was 4 or 5 years of my life. Yeah. Okay. Put it in one line because that experience, even though it matters that you had it, it doesn't matter what you did there in relationship to the job that you want, kind of like that old book, what got you here won't get you there. So you've got to kind of tie that in and just, you don't need to write, a paragraph about, being a PC tech back in, the 1990s, cut that out, just put one line.
Yes, I so agree with that. And I love that you mentioned that book because I have read most of it and it's a fabulous book. Gosh, I know his name. It's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway,
Covey,
fabulous
right?
book. No, a Goldsmith.
Goldsmith. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Gosh. Anyway, amazing. He's prolific writer. And then too, I love how you use the word legacy experience. I think I have something that just says past experience. So, but
I wanted to make it techy.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. Start using that legacy experience. So anyway, but yes, I totally agree with you. On my resume, I also have a section from some internships and some early career experiences where they weren't really relevant. I just gave a line for, and I think my internships, I basically put all 5 of them together into one line because I didn't want to take up valuable real estate on my resume, explaining what I did, a long time ago as an intern that's not relevant to the management or director position that I was seeking, just say this time last year. So So yeah, that's very important, and I do encourage people to do that. And I also get pushback, like you mentioned, like, "Hey, but this was a really important job." Yeah, it may have been, but it was a really long time ago. And we're not saying that it's not, important, but you could list it, but not have it take up so much space on your resume. And then too, one time I was interviewing or I was interviewing managers. These would be managers who would be reporting to me. And there was one woman on there that we interviewed. And because at the time she was an individual contributor and she had some really relevant experience, and I thought that it could be really good for the department. So we got into the interview, and then she talked about how she had management experience 10 years earlier or something. And I asked her, "Why didn't you put this on your resume?" And she's like, "Well, it was so long ago. I didn't think that I heard that you should chop it off at, I don't know what number she gave." But if she would have had a section that said something like legacy experience, where she had that one bullet line about her management experience, it wouldn't have made the interview so awkward, because we were like learning new information about her experiences. And it was crazy, because after that interview, everybody on the panel talked about that. And fortunately we didn't pick her for not just for that, but it was for some other things. But it would have made the conversation a lot smoother. So going back to the point of, if you have 20 plus 30 years of experience, highlighting those things that you did in the past in just one sentence, and just keep it moving. So yeah, I really encourage people to do that.
So let's say, things have changed obviously between 2019, 2020, and 2021. What are interviews like now in 2021? Let's say I haven't looked for a job in 5 or 6 years. I've been very happy where I'm at, but now, I've worked from home for a while, and my company's making me come back to the office next month. And I think that's going to suck. So I'm going to start looking for something else. What do I do? Like, what should I expect from an interview? Do I wear a tie on Zoom, or how does it go?
Yeah. So yeah, that's an excellent question. And although contrary to what people were believing about 2020, that no one was hiring, companies were indeed hiring. And I was one of those hiring managers looking for talent. So I did all of my interviews, I think with the exception of a couple, because each company had different rules about who was allowed on campus and who wasn't. So the majority of people were outside of the company that I was working for at the time, and those interviews were conducted on Zoom. And at that time, I didn't have a webcam in my office. And it was a crazy time. We tried to order one, and they kept running.
They were all
out of,
sold out.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I just said, screw it, after about 6 months. But I would literally go home in order to conduct these interviews over Zoom, so that way I had a camera access, and that way I could see the person, they could see me. And then some people on my team that were a part of the interview, they just used their cell phone and got into the Zoom meeting that way. And I say, going forward, you will definitely see a lot more of that, because in some ways, especially in those earlier interviews, say like the first 1 to 3 or so interviews, depending on the company, it's very cost effective to just pop open Zoom and have an interview that way. So in terms of your presentation, you should definitely dress up. And because these people, they don't know you, you don't know them. And I see interviewing as kind of like dating. Like, the interview is like a first date. You want to make the best impression as possible. So dress up and, just present your best self possible, and just see it as a conversation that you're having with your potential boss, your potential teammates, and other people that you may be working with inside of the department. So I'd say overall, that would be my best advice for people. And I also do have a video on how to interview, how to conduct, or not conduct, but how to participate in a online or like a Zoom interview. So that way you're prepared as much as possible, because it's not going anywhere. It's going to be the future, most definitely.
Yeah. And that's on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's on my YouTube channel. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll link that up in the show notes for sure. So
Oh,
people can
perfect.
find that at geekleader.com and have that linked into your YouTube channel as well as your website. So let's say we're going through one of these Zoom interviews and there's always some awkward stuff at the beginning. Like, how do you, saying hello, should you wave by or, what should you do? Should your camera be on? I imagine it should. But how can we prepare the scene? How can we set the scene and make sure that it's as least awkward as possible when we get started on one of these interviews?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So, yeah, at the beginning of a video interview, you will have that introductory stuff. Sometimes instead of just jumping right into the interview, I'll ask a question as the hiring manager, how's your day going? Or what was your weekend like? And of course, as the interviewee, you can share as little or as much as you want to. Obviously, not anything that's going to make me second guess. But anyway, I'm asking these questions.
So don't talk about what really happened on the 4th of July.
Right. Yeah. Just like, oh, it was just a nice, quiet time at home, something like that. Not that, hey, I went to this party and, whatever.
Yeah, still got a headache. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I asked those questions in the beginning because I'm trying to loosen the person up. Just a little bit, because obviously I know as a hiring manager that you're nervous, and it's, and if you're interviewing for this position, it tells me that you're interested and you can potentially see yourself working with us. But also, I like to tell people that coaching, remember that the interview is a conversation and not an interrogation, because you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. So with that being said, like I said, I asked some introductory questions, and then I may give them a presentation about the department, especially the last department that I worked in. The work was very complex. So just a high level summary of that job. So I was the flight test engineering manager for a department or for a sector. And basically what we did is we took commercial aircraft and we would retrofit them with military equipment. And my team were the prime system integrators of that system, or of those systems. So they would do all of the systems engineering work, make sure everything logically worked. We'd install it on the aircraft and then do a bunch of testing and make sure everything worked before flight. So since it was a very hands-on, very complex group, the most technical group, definitely in the department, I would give a presentation, maybe about 10 or so slides, just to give them an overview of the department, what the different groups that we interface with, what the typical experience is of all of these groups. And then two, not only did it give them information about the department, but it also gave them, if they were paying attention, how they could frame their answers in terms of positioning themselves as that problem solver. So I was, as a hiring manager, I wasn't trying to make the interview difficult on purpose. I really wanted to help the person. I really wanted to understand their background. And I did all of these things in the beginning to make sure that they were comfortable. So that whole intro section may have lasted maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then we jump into the actual technical questions. And on that interview, I'd have some senior engineers and then even very junior engineers, because depending on the level, everybody could give their perspective. And my senior engineers were really great. They weren't trying to trip anyone up. They would, ask questions that were really good and things I didn't think about for sure, because I'm not doing the technical work. But yeah, I just tried to make it a very good and fair interview for everybody all around. Now, of course, interviewing at whatever company, the experience can be different, but the most important thing is to position yourself as that problem solver, and don't be afraid to ask questions, clarifying questions for say if you're asked a question, you're not quite sure what they're asking for, ask a clarifying question. That's totally okay. Like I said, it's a conversation between two parties. You're trying to see if this relationship, if you will, is going to work. And so, don't be afraid and present your best self. Like I said, dress up. Definitely don't show up in your PJs or in a wife beater and messed up hair.
Yeah.
Don't do that. So I will say everybody that I've interviewed, for the most part, they've been either business casual or business formal. Both are fine.
So let me ask you this. Let's say I get asked a technical question and I know I should know the answer, but I really don't. Should I just like say I don't know the answer, or should I say what I think is probably close enough, and maybe I can kind of I can maybe talk my way out of it?
Ooh, that is really good. So yeah, I mean, so in some situations, depending on the nature of the work, you may not know the exact answer.
Okay.
So one thing that I've seen people do, and I've also done this myself, is to ask clarifying questions just to make sure that I'm understanding what they're asking. And then after that, I'll say something like, well, I haven't had that exact experience, but here's something that is very similar. And then they start to explain that. So I've seen that work in a number of interviews. And going back to myself, when I've interviewed for technical leadership positions, I was actually surprised that I got an offer, because I remember this one job that there were about 2 or 3 questions where it kind of went that way, where they asked me about something and I truly had no idea. And the reason why I framed the question in this way, I don't know about that particular thing, but I've done something similar, is because you don't want to try to BS the people on the interview who know about whatever technology. Well, you're assuming that they know this technology really well.
Mhm.
And if you try to BS your way through the answer, it may not look good. So I believe that being honest is the best policy. And then too, it's less stress on you. You kind of how do I say it? Like, you kind of pre-frame, or you kind of give them a heads up, so to speak, that you don't know about that, but you talk about something else. So that way in your answer, they're not expecting for you to know that particular technology, if that makes sense. You just let them know that you haven't, and then just
Yeah.
move on from there.
So kind of like saying, "Oh, we haven't used that, but what we have used is blah 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 blah," and then that way you don't show
Exactly.
ignorance and don't say something that's completely wrong and get you kicked out. But you can also then use that time to capitalize on something that you aren't good at. You don't know a lot about.
Exactly. Yeah, and I love how you use the word capitalize, because you are using something that you know in order to make yourself look exceptional. Even though you may not know XYZ tool or software or process, you are talking about something that you feel that you do have enough expertise in, and it makes you uh, a more attractive candidate when you do it that way. And one thing that I've noticed with people who are interviewing, they always ask like, oh, well, I don't know about this tool, and they kind of count themselves out, because with the job requisition, they may have something like must know XYZ tool, ABC tool. And the thing that people don't realize is that if you don't know that specific tool, but you know something similar, still apply for the job. And if you get asked a question about that in the interview, then you can pivot and say, hey, I
Mhm.
don't know about that tool, but I do know about this similar tool, and talk about your experience with that. Because when it comes to tools and processes, those things can be taught on the job. Unless you've been working in that group or at that company that specifically uses that tool, you're not going to know everything, and it's okay.
Yeah, so that's one thing I've talked to several people that they won't apply for a position because they don't have everything that's on that checklist. And when I look at one, I say, well, those are, I know they say, required to know this, this, and this. I consider that to be recommendations, that they
Yep.
want you to know those things. But if I'm confident that I know most of that stuff and I can learn the things I don't know really quickly, then I'll go ahead
Hmm.
and apply. And I've had several
Hmm.
people say, well, you can't do that. I'm like, well, yeah, I can. And I
Yeah.
do. um, and I know that because when I hire people, I look at their resume and they don't I have to have every single thing on my list, but as long as I got about 80% of them and they interview well, they talk about how they learn and how they've grown and the things that they're doing to better themselves and to improve, then I realize that they can learn that next 20% pretty quickly. I don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right with that. And the other thing that is important is, not letting not letting you disqualify yourself from a position, let the hiring manager do that.
Exactly.
And by not applying to positions because you don't meet 100% of the criteria, like you're just not giving yourself that opportunity. And I have been so surprised to see, people who get positions that don't necessarily meet all of the criteria. And then even myself, like I mentioned, there's a job that I didn't even think I was going to get an offer for, but they made me an offer and I was surprised. And when I got my first management position, full-time management position, I was going up against people with decades of experience, and even someone that was on the team. Like I beat him out. And then that happened in another job that I got in Silicon Valley. I was up against, me and some other candidate. I learned this later, of course, somebody that was at the company, been at the company for about a decade and really knew the people and all of that, but I beat that person out. I was very surprised. So if I would have just knocked myself out of the running at the very beginning because I didn't have 100% or I didn't meet 100% of the criteria, I would have never had that opportunity.
Yeah, and I can say the same thing about jobs that I've had before, where I applied for a director level position at a company that they were looking for someone with certain experience in their industry, and I've never been in that industry before, but I applied anyway and was able to say, look, I've never been in this industry, but I've met a lot of people from this industry. I'm familiar with an adjacent industry that I've worked with. I understand what's going on here. I just haven't had the work experience in this industry. And, I ended up getting the job. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things that can happen. And I think people need to, they sell themselves short too much. We always have that imposter syndrome and, always assume there's someone better out there.
Yeah, most definitely. And that even occurs when someone actually gets the job and they've been working. That's someone I'm talking about myself where there have been times in leadership positions where I mean, obviously I went through the process. I was the final candidate. I accepted the job, and it may be 6 months later, something pops up and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I have no idea on how to solve this problem. And I have to just remind myself, hey, you're the person, you can figure it out. And once I realize that, I figure it out and, attack the problem. And eventually we find a solution. So it happens at all stages, not just at the point where you're looking for jobs or interviewing. It happens at all stages, but you just have to remind yourself why you are the best and keep moving forward.
Yeah. So I was looking at your YouTube channel earlier this week, and I saw you had a video that was highlighting one of the questions that I get asked every time I'm on an interview. And people on my team, I was actually sitting in on an interview for someone on my team was interviewing someone else. And this was the first question that they asked. And I never know exactly how I should answer this. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about when people say, hi, how are you? Tell me a little bit about yourself. What are they looking for there? What are they asking me to tell them? Are they asking me to tell them about like my career history? Are they asking me to tell them about the fact I got 3 kids? Do they want to know about, my hobbies, that I went on vacation last week? I'm going to Disney World. I mean, what do they want to know?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And to summarize all of that, because I've seen people answer this question in a number of ways, but the best way to answer this question is to definitely focus on your professional experience. So what I like to do is to give a summary of the relevant jobs. So if I'm interviewing for a leadership position, I don't want to talk too much about my individual contributor experiences, especially if they're not related. So for instance, the last job I interviewed for and had, there was one job in my past that was related to the position. And I talked about it very briefly. But the rest of my answer focused on my leadership experiences, basically what I did, what some of the major highlights from those positions. So you just want to talk about the key stuff, not every single task, because there'll be an opportunity for you to go more in depth. And if they want to know more, they'll definitely ask probing questions. But talked about those leadership experience, the highlights from those experience. And then I rounded all of that up to talk about what I'm looking for next and how the position that I'm interviewing for checks all of the boxes, so to speak, for what I'm looking for next. And then it depends on how I'm feeling in the interview, but I may talk about outside of work, I like to do XYZ. So it just really depends, because in some interviews I've been asked, well, what are your hobbies outside of work? And in that question, they're looking for somebody who's not just a workaholic. Obviously, they want you to do work, but they don't want you to just be this one-dimensional person, because we work with human beings with families and lives outside of work. So
Yeah,
to
and
sum
that
it
is
up.
a question that I always ask as well, because I'm curious, and also I'm curious that you have some hobbies outside of work, because I found like if you can't disconnect from work, you're probably going to
Mhm.
burn out quickly and not be as stellar as you are when you first show up. You got to have something that you can
Yeah,
do to release and disconnect and recharge those batteries.
exactly. Yes. And it's okay to show your humanity a bit,
Hmm.
talking about your hobbies outside of work, because I mean, if they ask the question, they genuinely want to know. So I remember in one interview, that was the very last question that they asked me, and I told them what I like to do, and then I flipped it around. I was like, "So, that was a really good question. Can you guys tell me, what are some of your hobbies?" This was a panel of, gosh, I don't know how many people, but everybody, and this was an in-person interview. So this was about what, 2019 time frame. So everybody went around the table and said, "Hey, I like biking or hiking or whatever." And by me knowing this information, if it was something that I was also interested in, I would ask a question. So it just helped me build more rapport with the interview panel. And I know sometimes on video, it could be kind of hard to do that.
Hmm.
But, by asking, that if you're asked that question, you can ask that question, right after you answer, depending on where it lies at the beginning, middle, or end of the interview. But especially at the end, you can ask that question as someone interviewing, just because it shows that you're taking a personal interest in them. And yeah, you don't want it to be all about work, because like I said, this interview process is like dating. You're trying to see, what you all have in common, and if this potential relationship could actually work.
Absolutely. So, what are some final tips that you may have for someone that is interested in, you know, checking out what the other opportunities are out there, and what are some ways that we can go about finding those opportunities, other than maybe just the standard of LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I've ran into so many people who've applied to dozens to, several hundred positions online. And I don't believe that that's the most effective way to find jobs. I would say the past 6 years, jobs have been presented to me, or I've, used different tactics in order to find amazing jobs. So the I think the best way is to build relationships with people who are in positions that you want to be in, or who have, the quote power to help you get into a position that you really want to be in. I think that that's a better and more effective strategy than just blindly applying to hundreds of jobs online, hoping that somebody writes you back and invites you in for an interview. I think that that would be the best and most effective way to find something, especially now since the competition is crazy fierce, and you need to find ways to stand out. And that would be one way that you can use to definitely stand out in the search.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that networking is one of the great things. I like what you said about finding people in the position that you want to be, and that's kind of one of the things I did when I started this podcast. I was a middle manager when I started it, and I was interviewing CIOs and CTOs and vice presidents of technology. And now that I'm
Hmm.
in that role, it's like they're my peers now. But at the time, I was interviewing the people that I wanted to be, so I could build those relationships and those connections. So that's a cool thing you said there. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate having you on. How can people find out more about the things you're doing, connect with you, and get some of your resources and some of the information that you're sharing out there?
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think that's how we connected a while back. Very active on LinkedIn. You can just search for my name, LaKiesha. That's LaKiesha. Last name is Tomlin, Tomlin. And you could also find me at thrivingambition.com. That's THRIVINGAMBITION.com. And I do have some resources under the downloads tab, and you can find the exact answer that I give to the Tell Me About Yourself interview question, you could also find 51 technical and leadership interview questions under that downloads tab. And you could also get a direct link to that at jobsearch.academy/51 questions. And the feedback I got from that is that people absolutely love that resource, and it has helped them prepare for interviews, because it's not just technical questions, it's also leadership based and a whole bunch of other categories. So go ahead and grab that link as well.
Absolutely. And I'll link that up in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can find it there as well. Again, LaKiesha, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. I feel like I've learned a lot, especially with all that's been changing in 2021. And hopefully our listeners have too.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. This is awesome. Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.